Welcome, everyone. I'm excited to kick off today's presentation with the topic of reported speech. On this first slide, you'll see the title, which is simply Reported Speech. We'll also explore how to effectively use reported speech in communication. Over the course of this presentation, we'll cover key concepts, common uses, and some practical examples. So let's get started and dive into this interesting topic. All right, on slide 2, we're diving into some key aspects of reported speech. First, we'll look at special WH questions, which are a bit different from yes-no questions because they involve question words like who, what, where, when, why, and how. Then, we'll explore how verb tenses change when we shift from direct to indirect speech. This is crucial for maintaining the correct time frame and meaning. Next, we'll cover general questions, which are the yes-no type, and how they transform in reported speech. We'll also examine changes of pronouns, because when reporting someone's words, pronouns often need to be adjusted to match the perspective. There's a section on changing sentences from direct to indirect speech, which ties everything together, showing the overall process. We'll look at reporting present and future tenses, since these often change when relayed. Negative commands are another important point. How to report commands or requests in a negative form. We'll also discuss changes of time words, like today becoming that day, which help keep the context accurate. Finally, there's homework to reinforce these concepts, and a quick overview of special WH questions again, just to make sure everything's clear. Throughout this slide, the main idea is understanding how to transform different types of questions and statements into indirect speech smoothly and accurately, which is essential for clear and correct communication. On this slide, we see two examples of reported speech. The first one says, Helen said that she was tired. Notice how we change the original sentence into a reported speech form by using that and changing the verb tense from is to was. The second example is more direct. I'm tired, Helen said. When we report this speech, it becomes Helen said that she was tired. This shows how direct speech, which is exactly what someone says, can be transformed into reported speech, which is a way of paraphrasing what someone has said in a more indirect way. Understanding these examples helps us see the key difference between direct and reported speech, which is essential in mastering how to report what others say accurately. Now, let's look at some examples to understand how reporting verbs work in sentences. First, consider the sentence, he told me that he loved me. Here, told is the reporting verb, and it introduces what he said. Next, we have, he said to me that he wanted to marry me. In this case, said to me is used to report his words directly. Then there's, he said that he wanted to marry me. Notice how this version is a bit more concise, simply using said instead of said to me. The key point here is that when we're reporting speech, we often use verbs like say or tell. Tell usually requires a direct object, like me, while say can stand alone or be followed by that to introduce the reported speech. These reporting verbs are essential because they help us connect the original speech to the context we're explaining or sharing. And understanding how to use them correctly is important for clear, accurate communication, especially in writing or formal speech. Let's take a closer look at some common reporting verbs. When we say he confessed, it usually means he admitted something, often a truth or a feeling. It's a way to show honesty or vulnerability. Moving on to he affirmed, this indicates he strongly supported or confirmed something, giving a sense of certainty. When we use he explained, we're showing that someone has provided more details or clarification about a point. It's useful for making ideas clearer. He wondered introduces a sense of curiosity or doubt. It's like asking a question internally or pondering something. Now notice the numbers on the slide. These are just to help us organize the examples. For instance, he exclaimed shows strong emotion or surprise, often with a sense of excitement. He decided indicates a conclusion or choice made after some thought. Next, he questioned, and he inquired are both ways of asking questions, but questioned can sometimes sound more confrontational, while inquired is a bit more formal or polite. Lastly, he asked is the most straightforward way to report a question. Overall, these reporting verbs help us convey different shades of meaning when telling someone else's words, making our communication richer and more precise. They are essential tools in both writing and speech, especially in reporting or storytelling contexts. Now, let's look at an example. She told me I needed to study. When we convert this from direct to indirect speech, it becomes you need to study. Notice how the sentence shifts from a statement made by someone else to a reported version. This process is important because it helps us relay information accurately when we're talking about what others have said. Here's another example. He or she said he or she wanted to go home. When we report that, it becomes I want to go home. It's also crucial to understand that when changing sentences from direct to indirect speech, personal pronouns often change to match the perspective. For example, she might change to I depending on who is speaking. Overall, these rules for changing sentences help us communicate more clearly and accurately, especially in storytelling or reporting conversations. Keep in mind, the key points are understanding the shift in pronouns and tense, which are essential for proper indirect speech. Let's take a closer look at the pronoun changes table. Here, we see how pronouns shift from direct to reported speech. For example, when I say I in direct speech, it often changes to he or she in reported speech, depending on the person. Similarly, you in direct speech can become I, he, she, you, or they in reported speech based on the context. When it comes to he, she, or it, these pronouns stay the same in reported speech, which makes it straightforward to remember. For we, the change is to they, and the same goes for they, which remains they in reported speech. Understanding these shifts is crucial because they help us accurately report what someone else has said while maintaining clarity and grammatical correctness. This table emphasizes the importance of pronoun consistency, especially when we're recounting conversations or statements, tying back to our overall theme of effective communication. When I report what someone else has said, I need to pay attention to how pronouns change. For example, if I say, I am happy, and I want to report it, I can't just say, he said I am happy. Instead, I need to change the pronoun I to he or she, depending on who is speaking. This also applies to possessive adjectives like my or your. If I say, my book, and I report it, I should say, he said his book. These small changes are essential to keep the reported speech clear and correct. Now, the key point here is that we do not change the first-person pronouns when I am reporting my own words. So, if I say, I am going to the store, and I report this, I can keep the I in the report. It's only when I report someone else's words that I need to change pronouns and possessives. Understanding these rules helps ensure that our reported speech accurately reflects the original statements, while also maintaining grammatical correctness. This is an important part of mastering effective communication, especially in formal or written contexts. Now, let's take a look at the pronouns change table. This table is really useful because it shows us how pronouns shift when we're moving from direct speech to indirect or reported speech. For example, when I say I in direct speech, it often changes to he or she in reported speech, depending on the subject. Similarly, you in direct speech can become he or she, or sometimes they, depending on the context. When it comes to we, it usually turns into they in reported speech, and me becomes him or her, depending on the gender. The same goes for us, which shifts to them. Now let's look at the possessive adjectives. My changes to his, her, their, or our, depending on who owns what. For example, my book might become his book or their book in reported speech. Similarly, your can change to his, her, or their, and our can change to their. The possessive pronouns follow the same pattern. Mine can become his, hers, theirs, or ours, depending on the context. Understanding these shifts is essential because it helps us maintain clarity and accuracy when reporting speech, which is a common task in both writing and conversation. It also ties into the overall theme of how language adapts depending on context, making our communication more precise and effective. Now let's talk about the importance of keeping the tense consistent when reporting in the past. Remember, don't change the tense unnecessarily. If the original statement is in the past, you should stay in the past tense. For example, if someone said, "He said he was tired," you wouldn't change that to present tense like, "He says he is tired," unless the situation actually changed. Also, pay attention to the reporting verbs like say or tell. When reporting in the present or future, the tense can sometimes shift, but in the past, it's best to keep the original tense. This consistency helps keep your reporting clear and accurate. So the key takeaway here is, always be mindful of the tense when reporting, especially from past statements. Keep it in the same tense to avoid confusion and maintain clarity in your communication. Let's take a closer look at the tense changes table. This table is really helpful in understanding how we shift tenses when changing from direct to indirect speech. Starting with the present simple and present continuous, these generally stay the same or change very slightly when we report them indirectly. For example, he says, "I like apples" becomes, "he says he likes apples." When we move to the present perfect, it often shifts to the past perfect in indirect speech. So, "she said, I have finished my work" turns into, "she said she had finished her work." Now, looking at past tenses, the past simple in direct speech usually remains past simple or shifts to past perfect in indirect speech. For example, he said, "I went to the store" becomes, "he said he had gone to the store." For past continuous, it generally becomes past perfect continuous when reported indirectly. Like, "they said, we were watching a movie" turns into, "they said they had been watching a movie." Next, the past perfect remains the same in indirect speech, as it's already a perfect tense. Now moving to the future tense, when the original statement uses will, we often change it to would plus base verb in indirect speech. For example, "she said, I will call you" becomes, "she said she would call you." Modal verbs like can, shall, and must also change. Can becomes could, shall becomes should, and must often changes to had to in indirect speech. It's important to notice these patterns because they help ensure our reported speech stays grammatically correct and clear. Connecting this to our overall theme, mastering tense changes is crucial for accurate and natural communication, especially when reporting statements or questions. It keeps our storytelling or reporting precise and professional. In this slide, we're focusing on reporting present and future tenses. You'll notice the examples. "He has said he'll do it," "I'll tell her you are coming," and "he thinks he loves her." The key point here is that when we report things happening in the present, future, or present perfect, we don't need to change the tense. For example, if someone says, "he will do it," and we report it later, we can say, "he has said he'll do it," without shifting the tense. Similarly, with "I'll tell her you are coming," when reporting, we keep it in the same tense. And with "he thinks he loves her," the present tense, thinks, remains unchanged in reporting. This consistency helps keep our reporting clear and accurate. It's an important concept because it simplifies how we relay information about ongoing or future events. And as you'll see throughout the presentation, understanding when to keep the tense the same is crucial for proper reporting. Now let's look at an example. "I told her you are always late." Here, even though the reporting verb is in the past tense, the original statement about her lateness remains in the present tense. Similarly, "he said that the water boils at 100 degrees C." Again, even though we're reporting this in the past, the fact about boiling water doesn't change. This brings us to an important rule. When reporting facts or laws of nature, things that are always true, we do not change the tense, regardless of whether the reporting verb is in the past. So, in summary, if you're talking about something that's a universal truth or a scientific fact, keep the original tense intact when reporting it, even if you're speaking in the past. This helps keep the meaning clear and accurate. Let's look at some common time words and how they change depending on the context. For example, Here becomes there when you're talking about a different location. So if you're saying, I am here, and then referring to a different place, you would say, I am there. Next, take yesterday, which shifts to the day before if you're talking about a different point in time relative to now. It's a useful way to express past events in relation to other past moments. Then we have now, which can change to then, when you're describing something that happened at a different time in the past or future. It's a simple but important shift to keep your communication clear. Similarly, this often turns into that when you're referring to something farther away in space or time. It's a way to distinguish between what's close and what's more distant in your conversation. And finally, tomorrow becomes the next day. This helps clarify when you're talking about the day after today, especially when you're discussing events in a sequence. These changes of time words are crucial because they help us accurately describe different moments in time and space, which is essential for clear and effective communication. They also connect well with the overall theme of understanding how to express different perspectives in English. All right, let's take a closer look at slide 15, which focuses on general questions and how we handle them across different tenses and speech styles. First, when we talk about general questions in the present tense, typically in direct speech, someone might ask, Pete, will you go to the disco? This is a straightforward question that uses the present simple tense to ask about a future action. Now, when we convert this into indirect speech, we say, he asks Pete if he will go to the disco. Notice how we shift from the direct question to a statement, and we keep the future simple tense to reflect the original inquiry. It's important to recognize that in indirect speech, especially with future intentions or plans, we often keep the tense consistent to preserve the original meaning. Moving on to past tense questions, if someone asked directly, Pete, will you go to the disco? In the past, that becomes, he asked Pete if he would go to the disco. Here, notice the shift from the present simple, will, to the past, would in the indirect speech. This is a key point. When reporting past questions about future plans, we generally shift will to would to accurately reflect the past perspective. So, to sum up, understanding how to handle question tenses and speech styles is crucial for clear communication, especially when reporting or transforming sentences across different contexts. This consistency helps us maintain clarity and accuracy in our language use. Now, let's take a closer look at slide 16, which focuses on special WH questions. These are a particular type of question that often require more detail and are used to gather specific information. In the table, we see different types of sentences that involve WH questions, along with their verb tenses and whether they're in direct or indirect speech. For example, when we have a special question directed at someone with a present tense in the main sentence, and it's in direct speech, it might look like this. He asks, where do you go every day, Pete? Here, the question is asking about Pete's daily routine using the present simple tense. Now, when we convert this into indirect speech, it becomes, he asks Pete where he goes every day. Notice how the question turns into a statement, and the tense remains in the present simple. Similarly, when the original question is in the past tense, like he asked, where do you go every day, Pete? Which is present simple in direct speech, this changes in indirect speech too. He asked Pete where he went every day, now using the past simple tense. The key takeaway here is understanding how WH questions change when shifting between direct and indirect speech, especially with different tenses. Recognizing these patterns helps us communicate more clearly and accurately, especially when reporting questions in different contexts. This connects to our overall theme of mastering reported speech, making sure we understand how to adapt questions properly depending on tense and speech style. Now let's take a look at slide 17, which focuses on negative commands. As you can see, we have a table that helps us understand how to form these sentences in different contexts. First, notice the column labeled type of sentence. Here, we're dealing with negative commands or requests. Moving to the second column, verb tense in main sentence. most of these are in the present tense. This is important because negative commands are often used to tell someone not to do something right now or in the near future. In the third column, direct-indirect speech, we see that these commands can be expressed directly, like don't go to the shop, or indirectly, which would be he asks not to go to the shop. The indirect form often involves a reporting verb like says or asks, and then a negative request in the infinitive form. Now, looking at the main sentences, the direct version is quite straightforward. Don't go to the shop. It's a clear negative command. When we turn this into indirect speech, it becomes, he asks tells not to go to the shop, which is a polite or formal way to report the command. The key takeaway here is that negative commands are mostly formed using the base form of the verb with don't. And when reporting these commands indirectly, we often shift to the infinitive form, not to go. Understanding this structure helps us accurately report or give negative instructions in both spoken and written English. Remember, the overall theme of this presentation is understanding how to use different sentence types correctly, and negative commands are an essential part of that, especially when expressing restrictions or prohibitions clearly and appropriately. Let's take a moment to talk about the homework. So this part is really about consolidating what we've learned today. The key points here are to reflect on how the concepts we've discussed can be applied in real-world situations. I want you to think about how these ideas connect to your own experiences or projects. Remember, the goal is to deepen your understanding and make the knowledge practical. This homework is an opportunity to reinforce the overall theme of the presentation, which is about making informed, strategic decisions. So, I encourage you to approach it thoughtfully and see it as a chance to practice what we've covered. And of course, if you have any questions or uncertainties, this is a great time to explore them further.